A major update in the case of Mia Campos, the pregnant 16-year-old who was allegedly murdered by her unborn baby's father. That accused killer now faces brand new charges, including statutory rape and molestation, as prosecutors say new evidence has been revealed. This is a story we've covered on Law&Crime for months, but our first story came out last July, when news of Mia's murder made national headlines. Mia was only 16 years old when she died, and on top of that, she was pregnant with her first child, a boy who she planned to name Sebastian. But all of that changed on July 14th when Mia left the house and never returned. This is the last video we have of Mia, taken from a Ring camera at her parents' house in Loganville, Georgia. You can tell from the video everything seemed normal. The rest of Mia's day had been pretty normal too. She went shopping with her mom, and her mom says it seemed like an ordinary day. That evening, when Mia left the house, she met up with an unknown person, and investigators now believe that's 20-year-old Jesus Monroy, the father of Mia's child and her alleged killer. I spoke with Mia's family last summer about this case. They wanted to make it clear Mia and Jesus were not dating.
They didn't date it. It was like the way I got the story between between my daughter and Jesus. They met at a club, the teenagers club, and that's how they met it. Because I think that was my son's friends when they were going back to high school, but they didn't know each other. So when my son Alexis and Mia they went to the dance, that's when Mia met Jesus at the dance, because we didn't even know about him until we found out that she was pregnant. That's how I found out that I was the father of the baby. But no, that was no dating. That was no boyfriend and girlfriend. How that happened? I mean, that's only they know.
Mia's parents say Jesus wasn't excited for the baby, but Mia was. Her parents supported her and were helping her prepare. She even had a name picked out. She was going to name her newborn son Sebastian. On July 14th of last year, Mia was already in the third trimester of her pregnancy. So when she didn't come home that night, her parents started to get worried. They used an app on her phone to track her down, and it led them to the woods, less than a mile from her family's home. Mia's father found her lifeless body there in the woods in the early morning hours of July 15th. Both she and her unborn son had been murdered.
I feel her hands, and she was already cold. So it's like, man, my baby's gone. My first reaction is like, God, I put her in your hands. That was my first reaction, because I knew she was already gone. And it was, I can admit, I still got her picture when I found her. And it hurts. It was my baby. It was the last. I got 5, and she was the baby.
Did it go through your mind right away that Mia had been attacked or murdered, or did you think, oh, maybe there's some sort of medical issue here, that it wasn't foul play?
No, because when I saw her, I kind of knew that she got killed. I mean, you can tell right away, because Mia, that was nothing wrong with her. I mean, her health, it was 100%. That was nothing wrong with her. So when I saw her, it's like, man, they killed my baby.
When Mia's father found her body, there was someone else there too, Jesus Monroy.
He was just standing right there. I didn't see no emotions. I didn't see no anger. I didn't see no crying. And I was like, something's not right here.
Investigators soon zeroed in on Jesus as well. On July 17th, he was arrested for giving false statements to police. Just days later, on July 23rd, even more charges came down, this time far more severe. Prosecutors charged Jesus with malice murder, felony murder, feticide, and aggravated assault. A medical examiner determined Mia's manner of death was homicide, and her cause of death was strangulation. But the updates just kept on coming. In August of 2024, Jesus was actually granted bond, much to the dismay of Mia's family.
And just I'm here to represent my daughter. And I beg you to reconciliation the bond, because I'm afraid that, if you put a bond on him, he might run to Mexico or Texas, because, you can see to my left, you can see to my right, that the people we got. And that's all I can ask you, to reconciliation the bond for the sake of my family. and my daughter.
Even with that desperate plea from Mia's father, a judge ruled in Jesus' favor.
I hereby grant bond in the amount of $50,000. Special conditions of bond include that he have a GPS ankle monitor in place within 24 hours of his release. He's to remain at his address, which is his home address, to be included in the order. And he's only to leave for medical appointments and appointments with his attorney. He's otherwise to be on site of the residence. He's got to have no contact whatsoever with any potential witnesses in this case. And the passport is to be surrendered to the district attorney before leaving court today.
So Jesus Monroy has been out on bond for about 6 months at this point. And since then, we've done several updates on the case as new developments have come down. In one of our stories, we spoke to Francie Hakes, a former federal prosecutor right out of Georgia, the state where all this takes place. I want to play just a snippet of what she had to say.
And I hope that charges soon come that are reflective of the age of this young mother. This young woman, Mia Campos, was a child. She was only 16. So the very fact that she was pregnant means that her adult boyfriend committed a crime. Minimum, it was statutory rape. And so I would like to see some of those charges added as well.
And that leads us to the newest update in the case, that Jesus Monroy has now been charged with statutory rape after a grand jury indicted him on that and other charges. These charges came down on February 13th when prosecutors presented what they say is new evidence in the case. That led to these new charges of enticing a child for indecent purposes, statutory rape, child molestation, and 3 counts of making false statements. With those added charges, Jesus Monroy was arrested once again and taken back into custody. Just another twist and turn in the tragic case of Mia Campos, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into these new charges. So we're going to bring on our expert guest today. That's criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Mike Korbanix. Mike, thank you again for coming on with us today. And I wanted to start with the newest charges because prosecutors said they had a bit more evidence and they're able to bring these new charges. What do you make of all of it?
Well, I think this is a case that really started out in the wrong way because the defendant gave a statement to law enforcement. And if you're going to give a statement to law enforcement, you can't lie. And when you do that, that opens the door for further investigation. And I think that's what occurred here. And it just sort of showed the inconsistency of what he said with the proofs they had, and that opened the door for further investigation and enabled them to bring further charges against them.
You're right. The trajectory of this case is a little odd in that at first he was charged with making false statements to police, and then murder charges came down later after that. Obviously, as you said, saying something that's untrue to the police is illegal. You could be charged for that. But do you think possibly at the time it was a way for them to hold them until there was enough evidence to charge him with murder?
I believe so. And I think when a lot of times when someone gives an inconsistency or lies to them, it opens the door on another path for them to look down that they may not have had they not had this proof of the falsity of the statement. And that's what I think happened here because it opened to further investigation because they probably looked at places they wouldn't have looked because he said he wasn't, I don't know what exactly he said, but for example, if he said he wasn't there and then they found out that he was there, then that opens it up and it shows he's lying and it shows there's some sort of implication that he's lying to cover something else up. So that opens the door for further investigation.
So you talked about potentially new evidence, what it could be in terms of if he said he was somewhere and then perhaps he wasn't actually there and they can confirm that. What do you think are other sorts of new evidence that would be, good enough to bring these new charges? Would it be like location, maybe text messages, things like that?
Well, I think when you said text messages, this is the new era we're in investigation because I don't think a lot of time people realize your phone is like your biography now. And not only just the text messages is if they get into your phone, they can find where you were located. And then if they find where you're located and another person has a phone and they see those 2 phones located in the same area, that just gives strength for further investigation and one step leads to another.
So those new charges, I wanted to focus on them too. They are as follows: enticing a child for indecent purposes, statutory rape, child molestation, and 3 counts of making false statements. Now, the false statements thing we've talked about kind of a lot through our interview. Obviously, making false statements to police, that one makes sense. But the other ones of statutory rape or child molestation, I'm wondering why these charges may have come down now when we knew months ago when Mia was killed that she was underage and she was pregnant at the time. So put 2 and 2 together, she had to have sex, but she couldn't have consented because she wasn't 18. So why now would this statutory rape or child molestation charge come when we knew from the start she had obviously had sex?
Well, I don't know, quite frankly, if they had proof of who she had sex with. So there could have been some sort of things done in medical research and medical testing of her body after she had passed that showed some sort of connection between him and her. I mean, we don't know either if they took any sort of medical physical tests of him or blood tests to show some DNA connection.
Oh, that's very interesting because what prosecutors are saying is the motive in this case is that Jesus Monroy was the father of the child and he didn't want to be a dad. So he killed Mia and her unborn baby. So that's what they're saying. But again, if they have this new evidence confirming that he is the father, I think that that could be really strong for prosecutors. I wanted to talk about that with the motive. This is something we talk about all the time, and I know I bring it up a lot, but we don't need a motive in order to convict someone. But it is really important to paint the picture for a jury or even us looking at the case. Why would something like this happen? To me, the motive that prosecutors are presenting kind of makes sense. What do you think about their theory of motive?
Well, I agree with you that motive is very influential as to a jury because it sort of ties all the pieces together, and it's not saying not only it was done, it says why was it done. And I think this is a very strong position and very strong evidence if they show the motive as to why he did it. And I think that will bring the jury into a bigger focus. And one of the biggest things I think that always hurts in a case like this is that you gave a false statement. That's why there's a Fifth Amendment right for defendants to keep their mouth closed and not say anything. Because when you open it, you open many more doors. And I really, being on both sides, can never remember of someone who gave a false statement that ever helped them.
You're right. I think it really does attack his credibility because he didn't have to talk at that time. And if now prosecutors are catching him in a lie, or investigators, and now prosecutors can present that information, that's a big credibility issue. In addition to all of that, Mia's father actually spoke with him after all of this happened. And he said when they were searching for Mia in the woods, Jesus Monroy was alongside of him, came with him, and was there when he discovered the body. So now the murder suspect is there at the scene of the crime. And her father says he didn't react at all. He wasn't sad. He wasn't being very helpful. He pretended, according to the dad, to help in all of this search. So we have the credibility issue of lying to police. But do you think it's something that prosecutors would point to as well, that the person they believe is the murder suspect was participating in the search?
Well, that is very unusual. And I think one of the things they could go through is the fact that he was trying to, by doing that, he was trying to present that he had no idea of what occurred when in fact he did. And it'll be interesting if the case goes to trial, if they are able to present that as evidence as the father shows that he had no reaction. And I think a jury would have a look at that in a sense of saying, well, if someone really cared about someone and you found them dead, you'd have no emotional showing. That I think is very strong evidence for the prosecution.
And we never know how we ourselves would react in a situation like that. So I could see the defense pointing that out. But to me, right from the jump, it seems that the prosecution has a leg up if we have the dad testify to the way Jesus Monroy was acting at the time the body was found. If we're going back to the timeline of this case, first he was arrested and charged in lying to police, then with murder, feticide, all of that. But he was released on bond after receiving those charges. To me, that's a a little out there, the fact that he's charged with killing a pregnant teenager who he allegedly fathered the child of. So, just from that point, before we move into the future, what do you think about him being released on bond?
I was a little shocked, quite frankly, and I don't have the professional experience, I guess, to say like I could understand why, because of the seriousness of the charge itself, and plus the fact that one of the and I mean they're presumed innocent. Don't get me wrong, but you have someone who put another citizen, another person in danger, and now you're going to release him. Now I understand it was under home arrest and things of that nature, but I really didn't understand how they could do that, especially too when there was a credibility question as to him lying to law enforcement. Now you're going to say we're going to allow you to be released because we trust what you're going to say.
I think it was a question mark for a lot of people, including Mia's family, as to why he was able to be released. But you're right, it was home arrest. So that happened a couple of months ago. We reported on it at the time. But investigators did not stop with their investigation, and prosecutors ended up bringing all of this to a grand jury. Now, we know that those are secrets. So we don't exactly know what happened behind closed doors, but the jury did indict him on these new charges that we're talking about today, the molestation, statutory rape. What could you infer, perhaps, that would happen at this grand jury, or what would lead up to those proceedings?
Well, what would lead up, first of all, the grand jury will be released once the trial starts because they will have to, there's always there's always the ability to challenge the grand jury indictment and whether or not there was credible evidence in front of the grand jury. That's one thing. The other thing is, though, there obviously had more evidence to show that he was a danger to society, and that would have been something that would have persuaded the court at this point in time not to have him under home detention, even though he had ankle monitoring. And the fact that he's looking at up to 20 years incarceration just on the statutory rape, not even mentioning the murder, he could be looking at life. This is a reason to give a presumption to incarcerate because he's a danger to society.
This part may be a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's important to understand too. Correct me if I'm wrong. When a grand jury is brought about, there isn't as much of a burden as when it goes to trial. That needs to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but it isn't quite the same with a grand jury. Is that right?
That's correct. Grand jury is usually preponderance of the evidence.
So when prosecutors are bringing forth the information,
It's even less than that. It's probable cause. It's even less than that.
So then it sounds like it's a bit easier for prosecutors during a grand jury incident to indict the defendant rather than convict the defendant.
Oh, absolutely, because there's no challenges. They're just asking questions of witnesses in front of the grand jury. There's no defense attorneys there cross-examining them.
Interesting to think about the grand jury and then moving into trial, which again, unclear whether there's going to be a plea deal or if this is headed to trial, but it seems like it likely would be if he's pleaded not guilty. What do you think the preparations for all of that would look like? Because as we just discussed, both sides are going to be there. We would hear from both the prosecution and the defense at a jury trial, and I'm sure they're going to bring even more information because they need to prove these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. So what would that prep look like?
Well, that's always difficult to predict because you, as defense, you really don't have to present any evidence. You have a presumption of innocence. They must overcome that presumption of innocence. So many times people will challenge a defense just as to the strength of the proofs, not necessarily to prove not guilty. You don't have to prove not guilty. The government has to prove guilty, and that's their burden of proof. So it's always difficult to early on predict how a defense is going to handle a case without knowing all the evidence, how it's presented. One thing you have to be careful of in defense is opening doors that allow more evidence that only strengthens the government. So you have to really be able to evaluate how strong the evidence is against you.
Going off what you were talking about, opening doors, that automatically got me thinking about cross-examination. Because if this defendant says he is not guilty and he wants to clear his name, it's obviously up to him if he actually wants to go on the stand and tell his story. But if that's the case and he's questioned by his defense, he's of course open to cross-examination from the prosecution. That's one of those doors that you were talking about. Do you think that could be a risky move? Again, it's up to the defendant to choose, but if that was the case, do you think it'd be a bit risky?
Oh, it always could be very risky. And the reason it could be risky, among other reasons, is it gives the government a second chance of strengthening their proofs so the jury hears it again. And the more you hear something, I believe, I'm not saying I don't have any scientific background for this, but the more you hear something and the more it's consistent, the more you believe it. And the more you believe it, the stronger the proof and the better for the government for their jury presentation.
A trial is way down the line. I'm just theorizing what could happen because we want to know more. And I'm sure at the time of trial, we'll learn even more details about the case. As of now, though, he is back in custody. We know that he's been arrested before and released on bond. But what do you think about this time around? Would it be more difficult for him to receive bonds, do you think?
Oh, I think it's over with. He's not going to get a bond. It's done. Because, quite frankly, he was on a bond and now they said no more. So it's really not going to help him at all. And the thing I think that really hurts him, beside the violence of it, I mean, that's, it's a murder. It's a horrible case, but also the false statement ruins his credibility, even though it's just an allegation. But the court has to take in these all considerations. They don't have to find proof beyond a reasonable doubt to keep someone held during pendency of their trial.
This case is just so sad to even think about. A young mother who was gone far too soon. The details are so devastating. But it looks like we do have some movement in the case. Mike Corbanix, thank you for coming on and walking us through all of it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It's also important to note that Jesus Monroy maintains his innocence and has pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. But this case is still under investigation. Investigators ask anyone with more information to contact the Gwinnett County Police Department. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.